It's time to calibrate, and it's episode 40. I'm Marc Levesque. Joining me are my co-hosts, Brent Robillard and Bob Allaby. Our guest today is an old friend of mine, and until very recently, WatchTime's editor-in-chief, Roger Ruegger. How are you doing, Roger? And welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm having a screen in front of me with three people and I mean, it's really nice from you, Marc, to start the podcast with being an old friend, because when I thought about what we could be talking about, because I have no idea what we're going to be talking about today, I really realized I think you are one of my oldest digital-only relationships that I have in this industry.
Going back to the 90s.
If not the oldest, that was the equation of time. I mean, pretty much everyone else from that time I managed to at least meet once, but you I only get to see on screens.
Yeah, and last year in October, we were in the same city during watch time, but I was at the Hype at the other show, one of the tinier shows representing Isotope, and I didn't get a chance to go to watch time. But this year coming up, hopefully in October, we'll maybe meet each other somewhere in the US, maybe even in Europe, you never know.
But you are excused, because I know how much stress and stuff is going on, even at the other shows. I mean, I barely made it into the wind-up show, because that, to me, I am not just wearing the Watch Time hat, I'm also genuinely interested in watches. So
absolutely,
brands like Isotope or the 1,000 other brands that we have at Wind-Up, I rarely get to see when in Switzerland or traveling or anywhere else. So for me, this is like a key moment to actually try to get past security, go into Wind-Up, and at least say hi to some of the brands that are there, and maybe take one or two pictures of watches that I will never ever get to see. So yeah, I encourage that, but at the same time, I completely understand how stressful it is to leave and then not be able to come back.
Our show is around the corner. I took off for an hour, not even, and I, because I write for Warner Amount, I got in pretty quickly through security, and then I literally zoomed through, trying to say hi to my friends at other brands and going to see, like you said, some watches you never get to see in person. It was not enough time. There's too many people, and every time I wanted to speak to someone, there's just so many humans standing in front of the line waiting, and never got a chance. Got to shake hands, and then kept on walking. So yeah,
but it's like with the Olympics, the main goal is to just have been there and participated, and now it's not about winning, it's about having been there.
Yeah. So as we do with normal podcasts, for watch related podcasts, we start with a wrist check. So Roger, since you're the guest of honor, how about you start first?
I'm wearing an Oris Diver 65, but it's the Social Club edition. It's the 40 millimeter version with a white, even though I'm still not entirely sure if it is white. It does look occasionally like silverish to me, but it's not, with a sunray finish. So that's the Zurich edition. That's my actually first Oris, a brand that I really like. And I'm very happy that I finally got to have one, because it's always felt like there was a missing spot in my own collection. So check that box.
Is it silvery like opaline, like what Tudor does?
It's weird. If I'm taking pictures outside, it occasionally turns almost into an ecru, like beigeish, but now it's completely white. But there is some metallic to it. But not having the sunray finish on it all makes it so difficult to actually distinct it from that. So it's interesting, and I really like it.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Already took it on a dive.
Very cool.
Despite it only being water resistant to 100 meters.
Obviously not in Switzerland at this time of year.
Almost. I went to Germany this week. There is a dive tower.
Okay.
And it's one of only two which is somehow in my area that is heated, because we happen to have one in Switzerland, but it's not heated, and that's where I'm drawing a line. You do not get me in there. Uh,
Bob, how about you go next and maybe talk about your Mexican trip at the same time?
Yeah, so we just got back a couple of days ago. My wife and I decided to do a little reset to kick off 2026. We went to Huatulco, Mexico, first time visiting that area, and did a lot of just chilling on the beach, but we got up to a couple of adventures. We did a turtle release in a small little village called Ventanilla. It's a community run nature preserve. So everybody that lives in this little village has their own little part. There's restaurants, the people looking after the turtles, also crocodiles there. So that was a cool little sort of bucket list thing to do. I also got one of my favorite wrist checks for Instagram in Mexico. We did a mezcal tasting, and the lady pulled out this bottle here, and in the bottom is scorpion, and I was like, okay, that's kind of different. And as she poured the drink, she also and handed it to me, she actually pulled out a live scorpion from behind the counter and put it on my hand. And I was like, well, I have to at least get a photo of this. So I got a nice wrist check with the Christopher Ward GMT I was wearing at the time. And yeah, back home now to about a foot and a half of snow. So back to reality. But on wrist today, I'm wearing and I just got this via Brent, actually, the cigar club from Heron Watches. It's a sort of a dressy GMT, salmon dial, and actually a little trick up its sleeve is it's also a fully loomed dial. So that's what's on wrist today. What about you, Brent?
So yeah, I'm working the Tabasco 72 this morning, and when you were just talking with our guest here, I looked down and it was exactly 10:10, and I did a photo shoot with this watch this morning, and I thought, oh no, I mean I didn't start it, but no, it actually was. We're recording at exactly 10:10, but yeah, I put it up on Instagram this morning. I was up really really early, and so as part of being a partial insomniac, I got a lot of work done before this. But I really do like this watch. Actually, it has that sort of vintage explorer look to it. And the photo shoot that I was doing actually had that kind of vibe to it, maps out and all that kind of stuff, and compasses and field notes and that sort of thing. But yeah, I thought it was a good watch for a Friday being a field watch.
Cool.
Nice.
Well, I've got my Fortis Novanaut on. Honeymoon's really strong with this one. I haven't taken it off since I got it. Love it. Just a great watch. Very heavy, but super cool.
Got to wear that one recently while visiting the brand in Grenken. That's a solid piece.
Yeah, it feels solid. It feels like a tank tread on your wrist.
Yeah,
and it's been super accurate for me. That's important, and yeah, I'm loving it. Side note: I usually loom the dial before going to bed with a little UV torch next to my bed, like a nerd that I am. And yesterday night I forgot to do that, and woke up at 6 o'clock for no reason at all, and it was pitch dark, and the loom was still working very well, even though I hadn't charged it before bed, just on ambient light, and going to bed at 11 o'clock. So that's pretty impressive, if you ask me.
For sure.
So for our listeners who may not know who Roger is, here's a brief bio. So Roger, get ready. This is your life. Roger is a longtime leader and influential voice in horology journalism. With a career spanning more than 2 decades, he has been writing about watches and the watch industry since 1999, establishing himself as a respected commentator, storyteller, and chronicler of watch culture and technology. Roger founded his own digital watch resource, diveintowatches.com, in 2000 and began contributing to WatchTime in 2014, eventually becoming editor-in-chief of WatchTime USA, one of America's premier magazines dedicated to fine watches and mechanical timepieces. In that role, he oversaw editorial direction, award-winning industry projects, and insightful coverage of watch culture, design, and innovation. Under his editorial leadership, WatchTime continued to expand both its print and digital platforms, shaping how enthusiasts and collectors understand and appreciate horology. Roger also played a central role in WatchTime New York, the magazine's flagship consumer watch event held each October annually at Gotham Hall in New York City. It's a multi-day gathering that has grown into one of North America's most important and luxurious watch collectors' experiences, bringing together top brands, collectors, and industry leaders for representation, for panel discussions, and exclusive reveals. Throughout his career, Roger has exemplified passionate advocacy for watchmaking, thoughtful engagement with collectors, and deep respect for the artistry and craftsmanship of fine timepieces. His influence on the watch media landscape has been significant, making him a key figure in horological journalism as he transitions to his next chapter. So that's pretty much what I got for a bio. Does that sound accurate to you?
Well, I'm blushing here. I'm very glad this is the podcast and no one sees me crying like, Mom, you need to hear this. No, thank you. Very much appreciate the summary. It's way too kind. It's way too much. Always keep in mind, I have been privileged to have been surrounded by amazing people, especially with Watch Time. I could not have been more proud or more privileged to have been working and surrounded by the people that I have been for the last 10 years. So yeah, this is always teamwork.
So what first drew you to watches as a subject and writing about them professionally?
Well, I think my biggest privilege in life was probably that I knew from like very early that I wanted to write for a living. And I also understood that writing for a living is not something that is going to make you rich. So I already, at around the age of 13, I knew that writing books, as much as I would have wanted that, not happening. I think back then I did a little bit of research, and there were 3 people in Switzerland who could actually live from that. So my next obvious choice was copywriting. So I went into the ad industry, and while I very much enjoyed my job, I occasionally ended up having to do stuff that I did not completely identify with. That's not terrible. That's not bad. That's something that you always have to do. But that led me to, I need an outlet, something that I can control and something that I really like doing. And I did a very rational decision in something that is a very emotional thing, which is writing and is watches. I simply said I want to do something that has to do with the internet, which was kind of new back then for us, ideally with watches and diving, and at the intersection of those 3 things, I came up with, hey, let's write about dive watches. That allows me to do research. That gives me an excuse to walk into museums, to look at submarines, to do a little bit of diving, to talk about sharks, and occasionally throw in a watch. And that turned out to be really a creative outlet for me, but also something that became a bit of a training ground. Like everything that I've learned in those early years with time zone, with equation of time, with where we occasionally stumbled upon each other, like community management, social media, blogging, content production, going to Basel World with a camera, not being allowed to enter a booth to shoot watches because no one understood why you would want to take a picture of a watch where they have a great press kit off. So that really helped me. And at the same time, my career in advertising let me work for a couple of watch brands, including IWC, including Basel World for a period of time, also Graham. And that's when all those worlds came together. I mean, imagine me having a kickoff meeting with the Cousteau Society to launch the Aqua Timer in 2000. And I was like a kid in a candy store. This was so amazing. And eventually I made a conscious decision that I was too old for advertising, but young enough for the watch industry, which was supported by the job offer back then that I got from Ebner Media Group, which is the parent company of WatchTime, asking me if I were interested in taking over that job. So I'm extremely fortunate to have been able to do this as a job, which eventually always ends up me traveling to the US or anywhere else where they ask, what brings you to this country? And they say business. And then they ask, what is your business? And I say, you're publishing. And then the next question is, what are you publishing? And I say, watches. And that's where the conversation gets usually weird.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Why are you going to the US? A trade show about what? Yeah. Watches. They do that?
But I don't need to convince anyone in front of me, and especially not in the audience, how amazing this industry is, how great this product is, and how unbelievably privileged I am to be exposed to all that pretty much 7 days a week.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Really cool. So you started your own digital resource, Dive Into Watches, in 2000. How did that early online experience shape your approach to watch journalism? Now, I've got a side note. Back in the day, Roger and I used to participate on a website called equationoftime.com. And on there, I had the ultimate dive watch forum. Now, I've already discussed this on a previous podcast with Roland Murphy. But what I used to do is, because Roger is in Switzerland and Roger would always go to Basel World every year, and he was always the first to publish the latest dive watches on Dive Into Watches, which is a German website. And at the time, Google didn't translate the website in real time back then. You'd have to, Tausch or whatever. I'd figure out what I needed to see. And then there was a site called Babelfish that you can take the URL, pop it in there, and then Babelfish would translate the page. So I get all the information, and then I would credit obviously Roger, and I'd show those watches off on the Ultimate Dive Watch forum before the other forums got a hold of any of that information. So Roger, is basically what I would do if I would go to Basel World, especially back then when I was even more into dive watches than I am now. That's the first thing I would do. I would head to my favorite brands, go look at the dive watches, and then after that there'd be other watches. But dive watches were my passion, and still are pretty much a big important part for me. But yeah, so Roger, how did the online experience first come about, and then how did it shape your approach to journalism?
By the way, same here. Dive watch is still very close to my heart. I've never stopped doing that. Still a creative outlet, still something where I can learn, like video production and other stuff. So that has not changed. But because it really was an enthusiast publication and not commercially driven, it has allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And like in advertising, you don't do research. You don't do the historical part. You get a briefing, you come up with ideas, you do stuff. Yes, obviously there is strategy and other stuff, but like really digging into archives and having that moment of, I didn't know that. And then writing up those stories and something that interestingly hasn't changed throughout my entire career. There is not a single week where I don't have a fundamental, I didn't know that. Or and that has never stopped. And it never stopped to amaze me how much there is still to explore about this industry, how much we collectively still learn about the watch industry and what happened in the past. And that's where I got to fly to New York, take a train to Washington, D.C., walk into the Navy Museum in the Navy compound, barely making through security because I only happen to have a Swiss passport. And that's where it's just the entire thing gets weird, to stand in front of the original Trieste where they had the Rolex Deep Sea Special mounted on. And then take videos and photos and write about it. I mean, this is Christmas. This is so amazing. And having to have those moments, yeah, I will always cherish it, and I always will enjoy doing that. It's just, it's such a privilege to be able to tell those stories, to dig into something, to come up with something, and to create something. And that's where ultimately everyone who is writing probably understands what I'm trying to say. If you have the empty white sheet in front of you and there is an internal dialogue happening, and at the end of the day, there is something that you created, there is not much that makes me more proud than to be surprised by myself sometimes, where you come up with a headline, you come up with a picture, you have an idea. I mean, Brent, you just told me that you shot a watch this morning, and that's where I quite often already have the headline in my head, and then to get the picture that goes with the headline, which is never part of the press kit you get for the brands. And also knowing that, in your case, Marc, wearing a Fortis, it's not possible to go up into space and take that wrist roll with the Earth in the background, but maybe you can go to a science museum. Maybe there is a satellite in the background, or there is a rocket, or you go to Houston and have just that level of creativity that is just great. And that's where I actually like having to work with those limitations. I think that's what I really learned with Dive Into Watches. My photography skills got much better over the years. If I look at those pictures that you mentioned before, I mean, oh my God, like those were bad, but I was the only one taking them, so it was okay. That's like having a picture of Loch Ness or a new UFO. No one cared about the quality. It was like, oh, this is the return of Doxa. Oh, this is that brand. Oh, this is this. Like Eterna was always one of those brands difficult to get pictures of.
Yeah, you'd only get press releases. There used to be a website called SwissTime.ch. I don't know if you remember that,
Yep.
where all the press releases would go. So you get press pictures, which are touched up and this and that. But Roger would go and get the pictures in the counters or in hand if he could, at angles you wouldn't get to see in the press releases. And going back to copywriting and writing in general, it's so much fun when you're inspired by something to come up with a story. And then when you're done, you look at what you've done, you know, you're thinking you're going to put in 500 words or 600 words. The next thing you know, there's 2,000 of them down there and you're proud of what you've built. But at the same time, when you're doing copywriting, and Roger, you've done quite a bit of that. And I've done quite a bit of that as well. When you're not inspired by the watch and the press release is terrible, boy, is it ever difficult to put words down. You could be sitting there for hours and there'd be nothing on the page. That's happened to me many times.
But at the same time, there are 50 possibilities to cover something.
Yeah.
You can focus like if you had a camera, you can position the camera on the left and the right below. So, and that moment of figuring out how to approach a topic and then finalizing the story, the 2,000 instead of 500 words that you mentioned, and then being told by your managing editor that it's too much and you should shorten it back to 500.
That doesn't happen. Come on.
So I always really enjoy these conversations about the early Wild West days of watch content. I kind of missed the boat. I came around in maybe 2014 or 2015 and really started getting into the hobby then. But what was it like back then when you guys first started kind of connecting with people internationally? Again, the internet's fairly new. What was it like that back then for you? And obviously, I was going to ask, do you miss those days? I'm sure you do.
Yes and no. I think the fundamental difference that we have today is no matter how great your content is, if you don't have an audience, it doesn't matter. And that's where the media landscape, if you want to call it that way, has become so much bigger. I mean, imagine a German website about dive watches was ranking number 2 when you Googled Sea Dweller.
Yeah. Wow.
And today, this is like, I'm probably on page 312 somewhere, if at all. And I think that has changed fundamentally. People had, like, back in the days, if you had something great to tell, the chances that people saw it, it was intact. Today, it's occasionally almost impossible. And I mean, look at, the quality of content has reached a level where we have not been 25 years ago. So that's, don't miss those days, because what is happening today is with highly specialized publications like The Naked Watchmaker, disassembling watches, something that we have not seen before, video content that you can actually watch and not having to use a dial-up modem, which was one of the most frustrating experiences in everyone's life back then, and makes me sound so old. I should stop talking about that.
No, not at all.
No, I think that has fundamentally changed. We have an insane level of content quality. I mean, watches of espionage, for instance, that would not have been possible before. You would not have that level of access. You wouldn't have the audience. I'm still struggling. I wanted to do a story on military issued pieces. I mean, we all know by now that Omega does highly special pieces without date for military units. So does Tudor. So do other brands. But boy, is it difficult to send an email to a press contact and ask, could I come by and shoot those watches? Because I don't have those. I do not have access to these pieces. I need help. I need your product manager to explain and tell me, and that's where it's still occasionally very difficult to get access to.
Yeah, that's true.
So that probably is the fundamental change. There are so much more voices, which is good. I think we all need that level of variety. Quality has, again, not just my pictures today. I cannot compare them to what I did before, and I still continue to get better, and I think so does everyone.
Yeah, I remember back in '98, I wrote a review of the Seamaster Professional on my website. And for a while, if you Googled Omega Seamaster Professional, my review was the first before the Omega website would come up. My review would come up. It was really impressive back then. I had a Tudor Hydronaut also review that I wrote that also appeared before the Tudor website came up. So yeah, that was very cool. And pictures have gotten better because I used to use a flatbed scanner for my pictures.
And I mean, even with oceanic time,
Yeah,
there is
Telex.
it changes.
Mhm.
Again, back then I was spending an awful amount of time on French-speaking websites. There was one website in French that only covered 1,000-meter dive watches. So I spent a lot of time there, and also your website, Marc, because there were only like 5 websites covering that,
Yeah,
and now it's thousands.
yeah, yeah. And you're right. Without the audience, you can write the best article; it just won't be seen.
Yeah.
So it's chicken or the egg. So becoming editor in chief, what were some of the biggest challenges and rewards for leading Watch Time's editorial direction?
I mean, challenges is I really see it just as a privilege. Basically, it's a bit like being handed the keys to a very fast, beautiful car, and you first of all you try to not drive it into the next wall. So interestingly, having having had a digital background, both in my professional but also in my enthusiast environment, I've always been digital. I've switched over to internet communication quite early. I was surprised to see how much more performance you had to consider when working on a print product, because you have limited space, something that I've never had to experience. Like, and we were making jokes about that. If you start with 500 words and you end up with you cannot just add 4 more pages. 2,000 words, that's most likely a 6-page story. That is very expensive to produce, to print, to ship, to do. So the reflection on what is relevant, what needs to be in there, how much space do you give something with a print product has been much more dominant than I might have expected before. Also, obviously, the expectations that I had on myself to I mean, the I was given gigantic footprints before. I mean, to fill the position that was held by Joe Thompson before me, I was completely aware of the size of the task that was given to me, and that maybe also combined with me being Swiss, I have approached the entire thing with as much respect as one can have, including how we tell stories and everything else. I mean, this is where the industry can occasionally be a minefield, and even if you mean something well, it cannot be. Sometimes you need to factor in quite a lot of things. You have to be loyal to your audience. You also have to factor in the brands, which in the end, I mean, that should not come as a surprise to the audience here. We cannot just go to the next boutique and buy a Patek minute repeater, put that on the expense sheet, and then do a 3-year test with that. We can't. We have to be able to rely on those partnerships with the brands to have access to those pieces. And that relationship management, that is challenging, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Not sure if that answers your question, but
Yeah, sure it does.
We've talked a lot about your passion for writing, and we can already see that you have a passion also for editing, which is a somewhat different beast. So I'm curious, like, what is your philosophy when it comes to watch time? And what is it you wanted it to be for readers, and did that change over your tenure?
it did not. I think the role that a publication like WatchTime ultimately has is we're the missing link between the industry and the end consumer. And my job is to help said end consumer to pick the right watch. And we often forget that there are no wrong watches in the industry, but sometimes people pick the wrong watch. Like the easiest example, someone who starts getting interested in watches, buys a Rolex, then learns that this is an industrialized, mass-produced watch, and maybe thought that this was a small volume, very exclusive, produced by hand by an old man in a forest at moonlight, which it isn't. And that's not a critique at all. I mean, having an industrialized product Rolex, that's more difficult than to create something by hand. But that's where we need to manage expectations of clients. If you're into Invicta, I've met many people that collect Invicta.
So
Great for you. I mean, this is amazing. If that's what you like, go for that, do that. And I think that my job in the position that we have is to help people make that educated choice. Also, as a bonus content, you always get to blame us for why you've made that decision. So you can always go home and say, Roger said I should buy that watch, or I saw that review on your website and that's why I bought the watch. So that's also, I think, included in the entire thing. But in the end, we are the link between the industry and the reader. I am assuming that there are no wrong watches. I mean, we don't have, well, we do, but let's not dive into that. People don't create something to cheat people over. And if you are into Hublots, that's your thing. If you're into Rolexes, that's your thing. If you're into divers, if you're into World War II watches, if you're into railway pocket watches, they all look the same. But if that's your thing, great. There is no wrong. But occasionally there is the wrong watch with your expectation. And that's, I think that was basically my job.
that's a really good way to look at it. You know, there are thousands of watches that are out there, and there are just as many stories that can be told. How is it that you made that selection? What was, what made a story worth telling to you?
I mean, you can have the analytical approach. You can just look at the industry, and then if you have 100 pages, you just dedicate 22.5 to Rolex. You and that's how you would mirror the industry. Obviously, we don't do that. I think the story that goes along with a watch is, that's where the watch becomes a canvas, and it doesn't really matter what watch it is. I mean, if the story you told with the wrist shot was the Scorpion beforehand, that watch immediately became more valuable to you because it's linked to that experience. And now, me being able to tell that story where you went to Mexico, you had that experience, you did that, it doesn't really matter what watch we're talking about. It just, it becomes the human aspect behind. And that can be the story of the person creating the watch. That can be the person that is leading the company producing the watch. That can be the guy who buys the watch, the guy who inherits the watch. There is so much story. I always say watches are probably the most emotional product that we have, because it's quite often meant as something that is being passed on to someone else. So there is so much emotion packed into a watch, which can be the technical side. I mean, if you're a geek, if you want to know how a tourbillon works, and it doesn't matter if you want to know how GPS transition works in a quartz watch or a tourbillon or a minute repeater, there is so much we can tell about that industry.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I had a quick question. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but as editor-in-chief of a large publication like WatchTime, especially in the early days, did you find it difficult to handle pressure from the bigger brands versus maintaining editorial independence?
I think pressure is overrated. There isn't that much pressure.
Okay.
Really not. I have never felt pressure by the industry, but maybe that's as a result of how I moved. in the industry. I don't know about that. I mean, it's the same thing. If you buy a watch and that watch breaks down 2 weeks after you purchase it, there are different ways how you can handle that. You can scream at your AD, you can be unhappy, but still understand that this can happen and maybe focus on how the problem is being resolved. And that's a little bit the same that we do quite often. It's the challenge is getting your hands onto a watch, which is also where reviews are getting difficult. Again, this is, if we're being more transparent, we don't have the opportunity to buy, let's say, 100 Speedmasters and then come up with a statistic afterwards where we say, okay, this seems to be the most reliable watch because out of those 100, 99 survived the first 20 years and only one had an issue right away, and that was fixed in that amount of time. So we have a watch, and that's where we need to be realistic what we can do. Also, and I think that's also the good thing to say, we're not car journalism. Lives do not depend on what we do. I mean, it's significant if someone realizes that the Mercedes A-Class might fall over. That's a big story. That's where you can actually have an impact. But if one of those 3-minute repeaters that was produced by brand XY has an issue, then you just fly a watchmaker to whatever country said client is in, and it's being resolved, or not, because maybe that person doesn't care. So there is limitations to what we do, and I think that's where we also need to be realistic. It's, again, you have 1,000 possibilities to approach something, be it that. So I think the biggest challenge for me is always to get my hands on a watch, and also to get my hands on a watch where I can actually take a good photo, because I don't like not taking good photos. And that's when you're in a trade show environment and 200 people before you have already handled a watch, it takes you 5 minutes to clean it, to get all the fingerprints off, the weird stuff.
I know when the lady brought the Scorpion out, I was like, I wish I had my lighting set up here, and you know, but instead just a quick cell phone shot. But.
Yeah, Bob thinks of, I wish I had my lighting. I mean, if a lady brings out a Scorpion and puts it on my wrist, I'm worried about my underwear. Not the lighting.
But see, that's where content tops quality. The better the content is you're telling, the less relevant the quality has to be. If you're shooting a UFO or a Sasquatch or whatever, suddenly grainy picture quality is okay, or even desired in some cases. But in general, I like taking good photos, also photos that tell a story, that go with my headline, and that occasionally is difficult if you're trying to walk through those trade shows. And as you said, there are 10,000 watches, and you need to pick the ones that you think are relevant. And that's where relevance is something that might be technically relevant, design relevant, material relevant, trend relevant, ambassador relevant. There's pretty much everything can be made relevant.
So how has Watch Time evolved during your tenure, both in print and online? And how do you think it has influenced watch culture as a whole?
Ooh, that's a very difficult question. I think we maintained the publication's integrity. I think that's what I am probably most proud of. So in this world that became more and more influenced by influencers, and this is not a good versus bad discussion. I think we just need to be very clear about, as a journalist, the last thing I want to do is influence someone. The level of influence that I want to have is I want to make you buy a watch, because that's going to help the industry I deeply care about. I don't care which watch, but that's where I stop with me wanting to influence someone. I don't want to tell someone which watch he should buy. So every time I meet someone and the first question is, oh, you're into watches, what should I buy? That's always goes back to, what do you already have? What are you looking for? What is important to you? And I think that's, we managed to uphold that standard of this is us. We're not influencers. We know who we are, what we do. We all know that there is a huge paradigm shift in journalism that has just now, I mean, Ariel has just published a piece. Remontoir has also just published a piece. And then I think someone else also just did one about the future and independence of watch media, and is watch journalism dead? And the thing you can just remove the watch is, what is the role of journalism? Is journalism dead? Is it still a product people want to buy, spend money for? That's a very big and important discussion to have. And I think that's where we as WatchTime managed to be and hold our ground in that environment.
Yeah, I remember when WatchTime first came out in the US, there was In Sync magazine, which I used to write for, HR magazine, Watches International, and a few others, which were, I mean, for the most part, a lot of them were very much um, just press releases for brands and advertising, lots and lots of advertising. And then WatchTime came out, and it was a breath of fresh air. There was a lot more editorial. There was a lot more content. The quality was way above what the others were doing. And shortly after, InSync disappeared, HR Magazine disappeared, Watch International, I don't know if they're still doing. WatchTime is still there and
Yep.
still doing strong and still holding, like you said, to the standards of their quality.
I
So
mean,
kudos.
one of my eye-opening moments, I mean, and again, very selfishly, when I took on the job, like almost immediately, I went to the American Watch and Clock Association Museum, which is only like 3 hours away from New York, and dug myself into the library, because otherwise I would not have had access to the library. Why would I go to the US unless it were for a vacation? How do I explain to my family that I would rather want to spend time in a library than with them on a beach? So that was very convenient. And then understanding that every single WatchTime issue is being kept on record there. Just, I was very humbled when I walked away and said, okay, we need to have that contribution to the industry as a whole. And that's where, I mean, there are stories where I really feel that I was able to tell something that wasn't told before, like the story about the Swiss combat divers, for example. That's something that even I didn't know before, that we did have officially issued watches for that group. Or just stories that are more than this is new.
You know, even though you began your career in the digital world, you made a really quick shift to print. And at that time, it was still probably the predominant medium. So you've been there through print, through the move to digital. And then one might say there's been a third movement, which is to social. And given your recent comments just now, I was going to originally ask which of those changes mattered most, but maybe I'll change the question a little bit and say, do you think that final shift, that movement from digital to social, is a ultimately good thing, or is it harmful?
I wouldn't call it the final shift, but we are seeing shift, and that's where I first of all, I don't think the conversation should ever go into digital versus print. I think print today is in a much better position than it was 15 years ago. I mean, coining the word bookshelf wealth, suddenly people are spending money on books. So there is always a counter movement. The more digital something becomes, the more people are trying to get a detox environment, which can be print. And also understanding that the responsibility that I have, that people are going to a newsstand and they spend $8.95 on a magazine, you have to do more. You have to make it worth their time, their money, etc., etc. So I think print today requires a strong digital backbone. If you have that, there is a bright future for print, given that you have the right content to supply. I think social added an element where we could interact more, which I very much enjoy, interacting with readers, with collectors, with getting access to stories. I mean, like, I can be as much involved with the industry as I want to be, but I will probably never be on a waiting list for a $200,000 watch. So that experience I will never have. And we just had a very prominent upcoming independent brand who has a wait list. The product is now finally ready, and it's 6,000 Swiss francs more expensive than it was advertised when people signed up for the watch. How would I learn, if not through social media, from collectors that signed up for that watch, that had that experience? I, as a journalist, will never have that because my watch budget is highly limited compared to that. So, and I think now that we enter the phase of AI, which is more scary than anything that we had before, I think, and that's an interesting group to have on the screen here, life interactions become more important. Like being able to touch something, to meet someone, shake someone's hand, or it can also be a screen. This is clearly what we're doing. This is not AI. This is real. And I think this is going to become more important in the future, where people want to meet, want to have the community aspect of collecting, because collecting watches can be very lonely. And it used to be very lonely in the good old days, as you called them, Bob. You were a weirdo if you spent your time online talking about, you were a weirdo. You could not, like, even today, I always have the urge to explain myself, why am I taking a picture of a watch outside? So, like, there is a playground where my girlfriend lives, which is perfect in height, in light, it's wooden, it has a structure, so quite often I just take a photo. So that's me walking with a camera on a playground, and that calls for trouble. So that has changed. Today, I can approach, like I just did last year, a sheriff in a police car and talk about his watch, because he turned out to be a huge watch fan.
Yeah.
So can you share a few editorial projects that we're particularly proud of and why they mattered? Now, you mentioned one already about the military, Swiss military.
Yep.
Are there any others that really stand out?
Oh yeah. There are at least 4 worth mentioning. And that brings me back to what I said in the beginning, where I said there is not a week where I don't fundamentally learn something completely new. And I have visited animal producing companies several times. I have been with Ulysse Nardin. I have been with that. I don't know how many clips I have of animal dials being shoved into an oven, and then there is flames and the colors and everything else. And then here I am meeting Vanessa Lecci. She is an animal artist based in Switzerland. She's a bit like Anita Porsche, which might be a bit better known through winning at the Grand Prix or being mentioned more often at the Grand Prix. But there's only a handful of animal artists based in Switzerland. And I got the chance to meet her, and it completely changed everything that I thought I knew about animal dials, about how they are made. And listening to her telling her story, that she spends more time sourcing the right colors, realizing that today's colors are no match to the quality that they had in the past, that sometimes she ends up talking to monasteries to source old colors, that there is no documentation, like old manufacturers of those colors, they do not exist anymore, or the quality has changed. That opened up an entirely new universe for me, and that turned out to be one of the most fascinating stories I was able to write for WatchTime magazine. Then I'm beyond grateful for Blancpain, having had the chance to go diving twice with the 50 Fathoms. I mean, that's where like everything aligns. That's the Macaron Batiscaf edition plus the Ocean Commitment 5 that was launched last year in April around there. So those were like amazing stories. It was a French gentleman living in the Philippines who bought an island and then restored the entire island, telling me the story that because they used to do dynamite fishing before and at night. So they had to collect 3,000 batteries from the beach because they had those car batteries, and they just finished. So he bought the island with bags of cash, and restored it into a natural paradise. And now there is one marine protected area after another that's being built. I mean, those stories I will forever bother my kids and whatever is coming after my kids with those stories, because that's invaluable. And personally, a good friend of my brother who lost his Rolex while on a river cruise, and I got to tell that story, how it found its way back to him, and it's one of the most hilarious stories I ever had. Also very emotional, because it turned out to be a watch that was given to his dad by his best friend back then. His dad passed away way too early. He inherited the watch, but felt he was too young, so they gave it back to his dad's friend, who then decided it was still the right thing to have the son carry on that legacy with that watch. And then fast forward 20, 30 years, he lost that watch, and it made its way back to him. So it's a funny story when he told me that they were on a river and they had stored all their belongings in one separate boat, and then that boat flipped. So they were already downstream and they saw his wife's underwear float by.
Holy cow.
And that's when he realized he had, and just to tell that story, it's, oh, yeah,
so
those are a couple of the
cool.
stories that I tremendously enjoyed. And I'm very, very, very proud that I was given the opportunity to tell these stories, because there is so much trust involved that, I mean, someone gives you that story, and how you end up telling the story, that's a huge responsibility as well.
Absolutely. So if we go to the Watch Time website and we type in women's underwear, we'll find this story.
Could be. I think it's online. I think it is. Just type in 5512. That's the reference.
5512.
That should lead you to that story.
So how do you balance covering technical watchmaking details with stories that appeal to a broader audience? Like, how do you not drown people in technicality and still come up with a good story?
There are two factors that come into play here. One, I'm the editor-in-chief, so I have the very comfortable role of picking my stories. So that's already very convenient. The other thing is, as the editor-in-chief, I also need to make sure that the different audiences that we have, and again, we often mistake that there is just one group of watch collectors and we all like the same brands. It's not. Again, I've met people that genuinely enjoy buying Invictus, and that's okay. Why not? I mean, that's your thing, not mine, maybe privately, but hey, go ahead. And I need to have a mix of stories that address the first-time buyer, someone who just came to realization it's now time to buy an expensive watch. That might be the traditional airport shopper. He has a little bit of time. He has a long flight ahead of his or her. So let's buy a magazine, and just, that's me buying a camera or buying a wedding magazine. You don't necessarily plan on subscribing to that magazine immediately, but that's a one-time buyer. So we need to have that split. And if we just do too much of the technical stuff, that's no one's going to enjoy that. The other thing is, me being Swiss, not a native English speaker, as maybe one or two can tell by this conversation that we're having, is very limiting. And that's a good thing, because it helps me to come up with a story that I can actually manage. It's not that, oh, let me cover the history of the tourbillon the last 500 years. It limits me to a level where I can focus on something that I can handle. And quite often, I've also realized that I tell different stories in German than I do in English, which I found most interesting as a writer in my own life, to realize, okay, I would have done that differently in this language.
What do you think that the watch media landscape gets right today, and where do you think it falls short?
Ooh. I think we have an obligation to help upcoming talents, the next generation of watchmakers, the next generation of brands. That's something that we, as the watch media, which sounds awfully big, which it isn't, but I think that's where we should do more. There's obviously also a bit of a risk involved because you never know how serious someone is about a new brand, how they produce, what they do. So there's transparency is always a little bit of an issue. I mean, if you're covering a big brand, you can go there, you can look, you can watch, you can immediately tell and see and feel how things are happening. And that's occasionally more difficult with smaller brands that might even have outsourcing partners. But I think that's where I think one of my best meetings I had at last Geneva's Watch Days was with a watchmaker from Ming. I mean, Ming is amazing. That in itself is already a great meeting to have. But I had the product presentation with one of their young watchmakers. That was one of the best conversations I had the entire year. Listening to that young woman tell that, and that brought me a little bit back to my times in the creative industry and advertising, where you didn't want to work for the large agency because you couldn't have creative wild ideas. So you wanted to go to a creative shop that maybe had smaller clients, but you could come up with much more radical ideas and much more creative stuff. So that's when suddenly you're realizing there is a new generation of young watchmakers in training right now, that some of them, they want to go to the big brands because they want to have that controllable environment. But there's also a generation that is actively wanting to work for those young, wild watchmakers that we're seeing now. And that was one of the most refreshing discussions I had. And I think this is what we should focus more on. Also, I failed. I wanted to do an interview with an apprentice at one of the Swiss watchmakers, but I didn't get access to that because usually press department think that this person cannot be the spokesperson for this brand. So that's when I probably should have tried harder, but that's, I think, where we should do more.
You've had a very privileged position to be able to bring on new writers into the fold. What were you looking for when you found those new writers and those contributors?
I think when you look at creative, I mean, first of all, I didn't personally train young talent. So I was working with Marc Bernardo. I don't need to tell Marc Bernardo anything about writing about watches. Same with Zen Love. Same with Bilal Khan. Same with my managing editor, Dara Hinsha. She has been doing that job way before I arrived. So me telling them what to do would be a level of arrogance that I hope I will never display. But when working with people in general, it doesn't even have to be creative people. It's just most people want to do something good. There is not a workforce waking up in the morning deliberately trying to sabotage a company. So once you understand that people come to the office, they want to do something good, it's more important to not prevent them from doing so by having rules or just being an asshole on top of everyone. And if you let people work and provide somehow a vision or a strategy or a goal they can work towards to, you end up with amazing stuff. But once you start the soul crushing, once you start the I know better what to do than you, that's where creative people die. And that's also where I think the biggest compliment I've ever received is when someone told me that while working with me, he never felt more allowed to do things. And that's why should I stop someone from doing something? But just because I have the illusion of wanting to have control over something that you cannot control. I mean, the role of editor-in-chief has changed. It's the same with creative director. It's no longer the Ana Venturas. It's just let people produce great stuff, especially in digital space. If you want to control everything, you end up with a weird Monday project planning thing, or an Excel sheet if you're not doing that, trying to control and not focus on great content. And I think that's the balance that anyone in this industry needs to figure out. How to be a leader without being micromanaging. And also, I much rather have people make mistakes and me owning up to them than them being afraid of doing anything. So quite often, and that's really like the approval process of a magazine is quite extensive. And the closer you get to the printing deadlines, the more you realize that you're hopelessly late. If I am not giving an okay, then it's my fault. But it's not the person's fault for having a mistake. That's my fault. And I think that creating an environment where people realize that you're not being fired for someone else's fault, that also helps with the creative job.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at managing people and directors, and not just with creatives. I work in a supply chain logistics field, and it's the same thing with my staff. My team understands that they're allowed to make mistakes, so long as they learn from them and they don't fear making mistakes. If you micromanage people and they're afraid to make an error, they won't take a chance, and they may not hit it out of the park. They'll just be mediocre people who are afraid of losing their jobs, as opposed to people who are willing to give their all and take chances and risks. And then that's where you get the better work, the more impressive performances. I think it's the same all over the place. You're obviously doing it right.
And obviously we could have had more trainees with WatchTime, but since we are decentralized, Sarah Orlando is based in Florida, I'm based in Switzerland, it's difficult because the younger someone is, the more responsibility you take over. So the reduction in salary increases the pressure on you to actually make them learn something. That's certainly something that I regret, but at the same time, I had the privilege to work with amazing senior staff, talented people, be it our event director, Minna Larson, in particular, coming up with that show, in combination with Sarah Orlando, our publisher. I mean, those two have, I can only bow in front of them what they have accomplished. And then obviously my editorial team with Dara, with now Zen. It's just amazing to work with those people. And it's also great if you don't have to tell people what they have to do. And that shows you have the right staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just opened the door to my next question. Watch Time New York has become the cornerstone event in the U.S. watch calendar. What was your vision for it when it started, and how has it grown since?
I mean, also that's where it was not my vision.
Yeah, you mentioned two other people there.
It really is. It is a team effort. And if we want to go travel back in time, Watch Time has always had events in its program schedule. They were smaller, they were more like a roadshow. And at some point, Joe Thompson suggested to the team that why aren't we doing something bigger? That was around 2014-15. And then Sarah and Minna actually took the risk, came up with a show, and it became bigger and bigger and bigger. And we, as a team, as a company, supported the entire show. So as you get closer to the event, the more you need editorial coverage, etc. So it becomes one of the also cornerstones of WatchTime's annual program. But the vision has always been to provide an experience for people interested in watches that is less intimidating than walking into a watch store. And this is not me blaming watch stores for doing something wrong, but it can be intimidating if you have a security guard, if you have two doors that you need to wait till they have made a body scan of you. and then you go in to just learn that the watch that you wanted to have is not here, and now it's time to say goodbye. So that's quite often how it is, and sometimes you can only go to a watch store on a Saturday when there is too much traffic and you cannot really sit down. And that's where we wanted to create an experience where you got to see watches you usually wouldn't see, meet people you usually wouldn't see, and that's, I mean, it culminates in watching people standing next to Kari Voutilainen completely geeking out, taking photos, and just people telling me this was a bucket list moment. That's when we know we have delivered, and that's where you need to have the right balance of brands, the right mix of brands. It doesn't need to be an expensive brand, but it needs to be the right mix, and then hopefully also have the right people behind those brands. And I think that's something that we're able to deliver.
That's one of the things I like about the shows, even being like pretty in tune with what's happening in the watch world. Going to the shows, there's always a couple of brands that you've never heard of before, and there's a cool story behind it, and cool people behind it. I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on the explosion of some of these smaller independent brands since you've been in the industry. Good for the industry, or has it maybe watered things down a little bit?
I mean, it's always good. And it's very close to what I've experienced in the ad industry. Big corporations tend to kill creativity. That leads to creative people trying to do something on their own, which then has a huge impact on the big ones, because that's how innovation happens. And it's very sad that it cannot apparently happen at that brand over there. So that's very similar as what we're seeing in the watch industry right now, with the exception that quite often those young talents aren't that young. I mean, looking at Bernhard Lederer, for example, which, I mean, his story, his watches, they are beyond inspiring. To see this man having created this dream and now actually also being successful with that, but at the same time, there needs to be a discussion about succession. Or if you talk with a much younger talent that might not have had that much experience in running a company, like the example I just mentioned before, if people sign up for a watch, they pay a deposit, they have to wait XY years to get that watch, and then in the end, that watch is significantly more expensive than what you have agreed on. How do you handle that? Do you just expect them to pay because it's a luxury item, and if they can pay that, they surely can pay that? Or should you absorb that, knowing that in the long term that's a much wiser decision? Or how do you handle that? So that's a management decision. Also, those younger talents have a risk of being hired by larger corporations by, hey, why don't you run the Vacheron Constantin department, the entire watchmaking department, because we like what you have done here. And then suddenly that watchmaker is no longer on the market. And if you've spent 50, 80, 100K on a watch, that suddenly becomes relevant. And I think that's where independent watchmaking is, there is a bit of friction going on. You need to know much more about what you're buying into, and it's risky to just be blinded by, ooh, everyone is hyping independence, I want to buy it. It's so delicate. How do you manage as an independent now being overrun by demand? How do you manage that? You cannot just increase your production volume, but you also need to make sure that you're not pissing off those potential new clients. So how do you keep them engaged? How do you have a conversation? And that's why, for instance, Kari Voutilainen is part of WatchTime New York, because he wants to have that relationship. He needs to have that. And that was a geek moment for me. I got to talk to Roger Smith during Dubai Watch Week. I mean, that's even more extreme. He is working on only a handful of watches. So how do you make sure the right people get those. And that's very different as compared to the bigger brands, where when it's about Rolex, it's about waiting lists. When it's about another brand, it's about that. So in that regard, the watch industry wouldn't be what it is without the input of the independents, because that's where the creativity happens. But as an end consumer, that's also where you need to have a better understanding of who you're potentially buying a watch from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bob mentioned the explosion of new independents, and last year was the 10th anniversary of the Watch Time New York show, and it drew a record number of brands and attendees. What does that say about the state of the watch collecting today?
I think in that regard, we should much rather look at Wind Up, because they have more space to manage, and we never had growth as a strategy because we have a very confined space. So we needed to make sure, how do we balance? I mean, we at some point have to stop selling tickets, because if there are too many people in the same room, I don't want to have people fight for a minute repeater from Breguet. We need enough space. We need to have that opportunity for people to actually talk to Kari Voutilainen. If there's a line in front of his booth, then we failed. As an event organizer, we failed. So for us, it is much more, how do we best manage the space that we have? And we decided this year to not do panel discussions, which some people really didn't like. But in return, we got to have more brands. Not sure if it was the right decision, but at least it was a decision. We miss having the panel discussions, but at the same time, we also like very much having more brands and having more choice, more selection. So this is not like, yay, we managed to get more brands. We're trying to, again, look at it as a bit like wedding planning. If the wrong people are seated with the wrong people at a table, the entire wedding suddenly falls apart. And that is pretty much what we're trying to do with limited space, with limited availability, also limited time. We're building up the show overnight, and you cannot squeeze in more. You can add more days, but then the venue becomes more expensive.
So do you have any memorable moments or challenges you experienced while producing the event? Like, was there a time where Kari Voutilainen and Max Booster and Roland Murphy walked into a bar or something?
Let's put it this way. For me, events are always the most stressful thing one can do, because you're putting so much pressure on 1 or 2 days. And if you know event management, then you also know what can go wrong. And the list of things that can go wrong is substantially longer than the list of things that can go right. So if you're moving through that, I'm always very happy. Like Saturday evening, Sunday morning, where I'm just realizing this has happened, and pretty much from now on, nothing's gonna impact the show. And there are like details. Last year we had the No King rally, which we didn't know of when we decided on the date, and this can have a huge impact on how people can access the venue. If it rains, you suddenly need a wardrobe to have the coats and the umbrellas, and suddenly you deal with a different smell, because water smells different than sun. So for me, it was always more about knowing what risk there is, dealing with that risk in a responsible way, like not having people robbed, people having a great time, balancing security, accessibility, everything else. So yeah, we had quite a lot of stories like that where it's just, I'm always glad when it's over. but I'm also privileged. It's in our team, it's Minda, especially dealing with the events. Also Julia, all the organizational stuff with the checking process, with like the layout of the show together with our production companies. There is much more details involved. But for me, it really comes down to this is the bandwidth of things that can happen, and that's what you want to happen. How do you get it there?
Yeah.
And so far, knocking on wood, all the shows we had, I mean, it's the same with Wind Up. Wind Up has been happening for 10 years as well. And coincidentally, I attended the first Wind Up show in 2015 in New York, down in Soho. I still have the pictures of how tiny it was, and I can compare that to how like
Massive.
10,000 visitors, people waiting in line around the entire block. So that's where I think we collectively have created something that we can be very proud of. I mean, again, 10 years ago, people paying money to see watches, that's interesting. That's a new concept that didn't really work before. And with the help of having New York as an environment to do that, I think it's much more difficult to do that in a small Swiss town than it is with New York, because suddenly you have the brands being very excited about going to New York. It's the same with Dubai. It's very cool when you get to do a business trip and you go to Dubai, versus there's a watch show in Siberia where you might not want to go, or depending on.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, just now actually, that No Kings rally around the show created some havoc. Last September, we had a show in Toronto, and we had the Friday night event for the VIPs and media and so forth. And then Saturday morning, we all woke up, and the hotel that we were staying at, most of us were staying at, was a block from the venue. What we didn't know is that there was a marathon set up for that Saturday morning that cordoned off all the streets around the venue and the hotel completely. So we got in, we're like, how are people going to come in? It didn't affect the show at all. People managed to get in. They parked further. They walked a little bit. No big deal. It was actually kind of fun that this problem happened, but we didn't expect it. Right. So like you said, these little wrenches that you don't even see coming can just all of a sudden.
In my previous life, I did a basketball event in Marseille, France, and we needed to be evacuated by special forces from the French police.
Oh.
Because what we didn't consider is that we had basketball shoes to loan. And those kids, they gave us keys and ID cards, but they all turned out to be fake. And then at the end of the day, they didn't want to return the shoes. And those that we had, they all felt like now it would be great time to just hand them out for free because we no longer need them. The tournament is over. And that's where it's just, I will always remember that blue bus driving in and bringing us to the hotel. So there is a lot that can happen.
It's important to understand, though, is were these military people wearing Marine Nationale Tudors?
No, they did not, but I was focused on shoes back then.
Oh, okay. So what major shifts have you seen among collectors and enthusiasts over the past decades?
Ooh, that's a topic for 2 more episodes of this podcast. I mean, interestingly, since you and I, Marc, both started out a little bit in the same period, the rise of the micro brands, like brands that were huge around 2000, and today it's like, okay, what is Xenex or Zixon still around? For instance, when we're going back to that topic where people didn't connect the private labeling industry in Shenzhen with what was happening here. So the internet bringing this flood of accessible pieces that were sold directly online, or I mean, even Eddie from the
Eddie
UK,
Platts, yeah.
the
Yeah.
Dreadnought, PRS Dreadnought, which I had one.
So did I.
That was actually done by Fricker, if I'm not mistaken. So that
Yes,
was
and
German-based.
Dornbluth
Yes.
did the chronometer certification and all
So
that stuff.
that was extremely exciting to witness.
Yes, it
Also, I
was.
mean, that's obviously the period where Doxa started to come back with the sub. But that already followed the excitement people had when James Bond was wearing the Seamaster 300 in the 90s. I mean, I've been rarely approached by people about my watch, but I clearly remember sitting in a cafe in Zurich wearing a Seamaster 300, and then a little boy at the next table saying, "Dad, look, he's wearing James Bond's watch." So that period in the 90s were, and I think that's where we really have to say also thank you to Omega, because what they have done marketing wise with their ambassador concept, which was kind of radical. Also, Omega being the first brand to actually have a flagship store in Zurich, which was, I think, globally the first monobrand store. That was a very exciting time. And then just, I mean, it just went up from there. I've gone through a period in the 90s where there was a Rolex store operated by Bucherer on a highway. So there was like a restaurant that's built over a highway. There was a little Bucherer store, and people always try to get stainless steel Rolexes there because they always felt like no one's going to buy a watch on a highway. Turned out to be not true. It was as difficult to get them. And then suddenly, with the release of the Deep Sea Sea Dweller, all the stainless steel Rolex models were available, except for the Daytona. But you could pretty much walk into a watch store and just buy a GMT Master or a Submariner, especially a Sea Dweller or a no-date version. Maybe the date version, you had to wait a month or so, and for a Daytona, it was several months, but you could buy that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly, around 2012-13, that changed to, where are all the watches? Why can I no longer buy watches? And it got difficult. So the brands obviously got much more experienced in handling demand and production, which is also interesting, because as a luxury brand, you need to make sure that there is always less offer than there is demand. Sometimes to the extreme where you can no longer buy watches, that leading to maybe the passionate collector turning away to new brands, supporting Dornbluth, as you mentioned, accessible, smaller entities, much more variety. But then also, how do you manage that? I mean, Dornbluth today is very different to what we had with Dornbluth back then.
Yeah.
So those were maybe the major shifts. And now, I mean, we have reached an age where after an award ceremony, it's who was wearing what dress and then who was wearing what watch. And this is fundamentally different to what we had before. Obviously, that's not my cup of tea. I'm not into the celebrity thing, but it just shows what relevance watchmaking has become, even though that might be too much of the lifestyle factor with watchmaking and not the art, the craftsmanship that goes into it. But the level of attention also from younger people, that is very encouraging.
Yeah.
And I hope that's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I hope it stays. I also hope that the passing by person who's into the lifestyle, who's into the Audemars Piguet and the Vacheron Constantin and the chewing up all the Rolexes, I hope that does go away. And it goes back to somewhere in the middle.
I'm okay with having to wait for something, because this is a product that needs time to be manufactured. That's completely okay. It's not okay if you're being treated arrogantly by an AD. If you leave a watch store depressed because you felt like a loser, that I really hope we can go back to. And I mean, I've had so many great experiences with retail stores. I will never forget when I walked into a watch store in Zurich Bahnhofstrasse, because I needed to know if the Batiscaf in ceramic had a titanium case back or a ceramic case back. And I ended up on the phone with my retail assistant with Blancpain trying to figure out how that watch was built. And that was one of the best experiences I ever had in retail. And that's, I hope we can have more. I want to walk into a retail store and see how someone asks, what does a column wheel do? And that sales rep maybe turning away saying, you know what, I can't really answer that, but we have a watchmaker here, and I will gladly have him come over and explain it to you. I want to have more of that.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And if you don't know the answer, then let's figure it out together.
Yeah, it's okay if you don't. I mean, it's
Exactly.
really, it's okay.
Don't make it up. You know,
Yeah.
I've had an experience, and I've said this before on the podcast, where someone was showing me an Tagore Acco Racer, and I had commented that I'm not a fan of the date magnifier on the glass, and their answer was, "Well, that's how you know it's a good dive watch."
Yeah, or the
So-
helium release valve. I mean, it's always
Yeah.
funny to,
It just
and I'm not walking in a store to test the knowledge of a
No.
sales rep, but make it enjoyable.
agreed.
We're spending too much money on something that no one really needs, so please make it more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how has the relationship between independent watchmakers and the heritage brands changed through the editorial lens?
Very good question, Mark. I think looking back on 2025, Breguet has suddenly started to behave like an independent watchmaker.
Finally.
Seeing what level of innovation they'd have brought, also design-wise, taking a risk. So that's where I think we have finally seen more inspiration from the independents go back into the bigger industry. Collabs. Suddenly you have Restaurant Constantin teaming up with Philips for their Concorde Elegance. That's something that might not have been possible before. So I think we're more connected, we're more open, there is more creativity passing on from one to another. But at the same time, there could be a bit more of how independents behave reflected in how the large brands, like actively wanting to engage with end consumers, for instance. It's not a bad thing to know your clients, even though maybe you're just selling your watches to retail. But your business transaction doesn't stop there. You still have the end consumer who will ultimately be your client. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of that. Brands being more approachable. But at the same time, we also know that luxury in general, exclusivity comes with a little bit of an arrogant attitude. So as a brand, you can be very accessible and approachable in a high level environment, but you can also be very arrogant and exclusive in a lower price segment. And I think that's where brands need to figure out who they are and how they treat people.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Back in the day, I remember when you used to buy an Omega Seamaster or any Omega that was chronometer rated, you get a little card saying that it was chronometer rated. But if you wanted the certificate, you could email Omega and they'll send it to you. And I've done that a few times back but you'd get communication direct with people in higher up in customer service. And do you need anything else? Same thing. I had a GP Laureato that I'd gotten from Roland Murphy because RGM was a service center for Girard-Perregaux back then. And he had overstock of Laureatos. I got one for next to nothing at the time, but I knew nothing about their 3000 movement. So I emailed Girard-Perregaux. They sent me the schematics, like the actual schematics for the movement, and asked me if I needed any more information, if I wanted to talk to a watchmaker. I'm like, holy cow, this is fantastic.
And see, that's where, especially in service après-vente,
yeah,
if you have to send in your watch for 6 months, can we have a little bit of dialogue going on in between? And this is not, I'm not unreasonable. I'm not expecting that watch to be sent back to me in 2 weeks, but during those 6 months, not communicating at all is not the preferred option. I mean, you could easily get an email from, hey, this is Steve, your watchmaker. He's going to take care of your watch. This is your watch.
Yeah. And I found what the problem was. This is what happened. This is what I'm going to do to your watch. Hey, do you want it refinished at the same time? Communication. Agreed.
And I think that's, but again, that's might be wishful thinking. Brands are still
Mm,
investing more in marketing and the front of the operation than in the back end of the operation. But there is so much potential how you can have a client relationship that might even lead to repeat purchase.
exactly. I think that the way a brand handles a problem, how customers are treated after sales, can cement and build on the relationship for future sales. If you don't
Absolutely.
handle that, you'll have one-time customers and you're going to start running out of one-time customers at a certain point. So I think after sales is super important and is not regarded enough in our industry. So hopefully that changes with some time.
And that brings me back to the role of watch time. We also need to make sure that we educate end consumers so that they know that plus 2 seconds a day is not unreasonable.
Yeah,
You don't need to shout at your retailer if your watch is running 2 seconds fast a day. So that's where I think we're in between the brands and the end consumer both ways. They're also difficult clients. It's not just the brands. I mean, I've been in watch stores where it's just, oh my God.
yeah. Well, there was a podcast on the Joe Rogan podcast where Elon Musk and him were talking about a Rolex running fast, and that Joe Rogan had to go into the dealership once every couple of months because his watch was a couple of minutes fast, and Elon Musk was just laughing at him. They should be making it better than that. It's just they should know better. It's just
Plus being on time has nothing to do with the device you're using to measure time. That's a very internal thing. Either you want to be on time or not.
yeah. Or you're anal retentive like I am, and I need the watch to be accurate. That's just me. So reflecting on your career, what do you see as your biggest achievement in watch journalism so far?
Ooh. That sounds like I'm very close to
You can say being
dying.
on this podcast, and we can accept
Yes,
that.
this no, this I mean, needless to say, but I think people know that I don't. Having been invited to this podcast, I'm gonna call my mom right after this call. No, I don't want to look at my career this way. There is too much in front of me that I never have that internal dialogue with myself. Again, I've told some of the stories that I'm very, very proud of that I was able to tell them. But for me, it's again, I've just been in Germany in a dive tower. That was an amazing story. So what's next week? What's the week after? So I still believe that it is yet to happen.
Okay. So what advice do you have for emerging writers who want to cover watches and horology?
Just write. Too often I'm meeting young talents that somehow wait for someone to give them an opportunity to write. We live in an ecosystem where no one is holding you back. And that, I mean, if you want to compose music, if you want to do movies, if you do want to write something, if you want to create a book, just don't wait for anyone to just do it. And in most cases, it's the people that didn't give up that turn out to be successful. I mean, look at actors. That's probably one of the most difficult industries to be successful. And I think everyone who ends up on a stage winning an award is someone that didn't give up and eventually also got very lucky at some point. And I think that's where someone who wants to do that, no one is stopping you. No one's stopping you from sending an email with a text to someone offering your services, your story, your ideas, or create something on your own.
Yeah, I think creating something on their own is important because with today's world, Blogger doesn't cost anything. You can
Yeah.
have a WordPress website, doesn't cost anything. You can have a Substack, doesn't cost you anything. You can write, just
Yeah.
write.
And it's much easier to hire someone if that person already has a portfolio. And it doesn't matter what that portfolio is made of. It doesn't need to be the New York Times. It's just, look, this is the watch I had. This is the pictures I took. This is what so please just do.
Yeah, you know what? This is what you and I did at the beginning. We were writing on Time Zone, an equation of time, and we're doing reviews for nothing, just for ourselves, entertaining ourselves and educating ourselves. And when I pitched, because I wanted to write for a magazine, when I pitched to the editors, it was all the work that I had done online. And that's what got me the job at InSync.
Yeah.
Just get it out there. Like, just
Yeah.
get it out there.
What are your fears when it comes to AI and watch journalism or journalism in general? Do you see, what kind of effects are you expecting or maybe hoping for over the next couple of years with that, or worried about, for that matter?
That's a question where I always wear two hats. I'm the rational guy in me can also tell you if we're living in a society where supply and demand answer everything, then if people are no longer willing to pay for journalism, then maybe the product needs to change. I can't make people change. If people don't want to spend money on a wedding photographer because they think they can take their own photos, that's a fact. Unfortunately, there is change. So I have no difficulties in accepting that change is happening. Also, looking at how much terrible content we have. And again, this is not about watch media. This is about, in general, if you go through Facebook or anywhere else, people don't seem to care if something is of high quality or well-researched or well-written. So if there is no demand for a product, then the product needs to change or adapt or evolve. Now with AI, I think we have reached a new level where quite often when I spend my weekends, because the weekend is usually when I write best because I don't have meetings, I don't have calls, that's where I can just sit down, and I usually need 8 hours for a 6-page story or something bigger. And I need that uninterrupted. If I have a call, then I'll be set back. So that's usually my happy time. And then my girlfriend often looks at me and says, "Why aren't you using AI?" And she is super fluent in AI. She is much more smarter than I am. So like, yeah, I could, but that's when I reply to her, why would I have no difficulties in streamlining processes? I'm the first to use something that makes my life more, like, from HTML going to WordPress. Oh my God, I don't need to code. I'm so happy if I can do videos quicker or other. So I am the first one to embrace new technology. But in this case, why would I want to kill the only thing that is really meaningful in my job? And that's, if you're a composer, if you're a director, if you're in just whoever wants to come up with ideas, we're giving away the most satisfying, most essential part of what makes us us by using a tool. Then the rational in me says, yeah, but it's a tool. It's always, if you're good in expressing your ideas, aka prompting, then it just makes you faster and more efficient. And it's scary to see how fast it is evolving. But I think for the first time, AI is no longer speeding up things. It's fundamentally changing our role in creating things. And that brings us back to cavemen painting something on a wall. I don't know how we as a society will change if you remove the desire to create something. So in that regard, I'm a bit scared.
I think it makes things more valuable, though. You know, in the future where maybe the bulk of things are AI created, the things that are done out of a person's own mind or experiences, and maybe become more valuable.
I'm the first one to agree with that, because watchmaking is the best example of that. I mean, we're paying for something that is there is better technology to do what a watch does. So, or fountain pens. I think we're also seeing a revival of fountain pens. I don't think people are sending more love letters that are handwritten, but celebrating this part of what we do, I think that's going to make it safe. I just don't know if writing is going to be on the same level. And maybe also music, where we no longer, and that's, I think we can all agree, you don't need to like paintings, you don't need to like sculptures, but I think we all love music.
Yep.
but the level of money we spend to support people to creating music is very unfair. Like, we no longer buy vinyl. I mean, the only way artists can make money is by doing concerts and providing a life experience that cannot be replicated online. So that's where maybe we need to change. Maybe we need to have this discussion in front of a live audience, and that might be something. But AI in general is going to have the biggest impact on everything we do as human beings.
Are you seeing, this is not on our outline as far as questions, but it does pertain to the AI. Are you seeing a change in the traffic to watch time because of AI, because of the summaries that Google give you before? Like, if I want to research something, you type in,
Yeah.
again, Omega Seamaster, AI is going to spit out a bunch of stuff about the watch that I don't have to click on the articles below. Are you seeing an effect on watch time?
Interestingly, no. We have been surprisingly stable. I do know of other media publications that have seen that impact, and we're talking up to 30 to 40% of
Yeah, I mentioned it
reduced
because
traffic.
Worn and Wound, that was an issue we started seeing a year or so ago.
I'm seeing it with Dive into Watches because it's such a niche publication in German, and I've been overtaken by all the English content. That's like I've gone from number 2 Sea Dweller to who? But it's okay. It's
Yeah.
not always world domination that's the goal.
Speaking of world domination, what's on the horizon? What exciting projects or goals are you planning next? And even more important, what's going to be your next watch?
Ooh, let's start with the more fun one. I don't know if everyone can relate to, but I have a list. This is a very dynamic list where all the watches I want to have or want to cover are on. There is some change. Maybe number 3 suddenly becomes number 1. Maybe there's an opportunity to buy number 4. But right now, my biggest lesson and I don't want to call myself collector because I have met too many collectors to somehow not feel like a collector. I just have more than one watch.
Yeah,
But
you and I are the same in that respect.
I have learned to not sell watches because every time I sold the watch, I immediately regretted it. And in some cases, I had to repurchase a watch that I sold for a much higher price. And in some cases, I never managed to buy that Seamaster 120 chronograph back that I stupidly sold and I shouldn't have. So the number of acquisitions decreased, but pieces stayed, which is a good thing because occasionally there is a reissue of a watch, and it's great when I have the old one and can do a comparison. So that strategy for me, do not sell watches, that really paid off. And now I have actually reached a level where my list is very short. There is nothing immediately on that list where I think I cannot live another day without that watch. So that's a new moment. Maybe because I'm getting older, maybe because I didn't sell that many watches in the past. But it feels like my list is much more manageable these days than it was in the past. So I don't have a watch ahead of me right now, which is weird. I do have a list. I still want to have the Seamaster Ultra Deep, the titanium one with the fixed lugs. That's like the greatest watch ever. If Omega were to release a new plop rough based on the blue one that they released just recently, I'm going to be very much endangered, obviously. But I'm much more relaxed. So I do have a list with maybe 5 watches. Seamaster 1000 is very high on that list, but I will never find one at a price where I feel comfortable buying one. So I'm okay. So maybe there is a accidental purchase, like getting a call out of the blue from someone, then I'm the first one to do something else. But I don't think that I will buy a watch in like 3 months. This can immediately change after Watches and Wonders when I see the novelties, and I'm being as tempted as everyone else, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's that. Professionally, I'm going to be starting a new chapter March 1st. It's too early to announce what and where, but it's going to be smaller. It's not going to feel as, let's say, as big as Watch Time, but that's also good. That's going to allow me to focus more on ideas, to execute more ideas, to move faster, quicker, a bit more unconventional, maybe, who knows? That's a good thing. So I'm very much looking forward to that. At the same time, this was one of the hardest decisions in my entire life. That's the greatest title, the best publication, the best team I've ever worked with. But at some point, it was also the right moment to do something. I'm not getting younger, so it's either now or tomorrow.
Very cool. We wish you best of luck. So
Thank
on
you.
behalf of the three of us, I'd like to thank you once again for appearing on our show. We look really forward to your future endeavors, and hopefully you can come back and see us and tell us all about it in another show.
Anytime. I feel very sorry for everyone who's going to listen to this podcast. We almost have 2 hours. I mean, who's going to do that to himself? Sorry,
You'd be surprised.
sorry, everyone.
You'd be surprised. Actually, this is relatively short we've been 2 hours several times. And
to the audience, you're amazing. If you're sticking with this podcast for 106 minutes, I want to meet you, because you're as passionate about watches as the four of us are. So thank you for sticking with us and having me. To the three of you, thank you so much for having me. It's always
no
fun.
problem. You know what? We were doing shorter shows at the beginning, and it's great. We got good questions in, but I find that the longer format allows people to get a little more comfortable with the storytelling. And if there's a bigger story out there, if they feel comfortable to just air it out, and it's been well received with our fans, our listeners. So
bigger country, longer roads, longer drive. So
exactly, commutes are longer.
100%. Yeah.
Wouldn't work in Switzerland, a country that could fit 3 times into Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
So the Time to Calibrate podcast is out every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you download your podcast. Please like, review, or subscribe. And if you like the show, recommend it to a friend. We'd really appreciate it. That's all for now. Until next time, T2C out.